Hello, and welcome to your 2021 Bank Secrecy Act and Anti-Money Laundering training. My name is Alicia, Member Engagement Consultant with the League of Southeastern Credit Unions. Now let's get started. Basic themes of BSA compliance can be broken down into three main categories, including analyzing and managing your risk and understanding that every credit union's risk is going to be different from the next due to the number of factors that go into your BSA program. Second is knowing your members. We're already very proud of this from a relationship banking perspective, but it also can help us with BSA concerns as well. And the third piece is documenting everything. As we'll learn, there are two documents that we are required to complete along with our BSA program, and we'll go through the ins and outs of those. So the purpose of the Bank Secrecy Act was designed to identify the source, volume, and movement of currency across the United States, as well as creating a record-keeping obligation that we'll discuss as we get into our reports. And all of these efforts are done to prevent money laundering. So what in the world is money laundering? This chart explains it very nice for us. So over in the top left, we have the collection of dirty money, and dirty money is defined as any funds that are coming from any illegal source. So they then want to place those funds into the financial system. And they're going to be using lots of sneaky techniques called layering. And some examples of these are around the globe for you. It's pretty much anything that's creating all sorts of twists and turns so that at the time those funds arrive at your credit union, it's impossible for you to tell what the original source was. Examples include wire transfers, offshore bank accounts, loans from a fake company to a legitimate company, creating a false invoice and submitting that for payment. Again, anything that takes those funds and it's impossible to tell what the original source was. If they're able to successfully use these tactics and integrate those funds into the financial system, that's when we make it over to the bottom left of the chart where they're able to purchase real tangible assets with those funds, exactly what we are trying to avoid. The Bank Secrecy Act moves through so many different departments and organizations that this chart at the bottom explains the flow very nicely for us. On the left, we see FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network of the U.S. Treasury Department. They're the ones that create the statute and tell us that we need to be compliant with it. In the middle, we have credit unions. We talk about the front line a lot in credit union land, but in this case, we are literally the front line against anti-money laundering. And that is why we are seen as the experts due to this level of experience and also where our compliance requirement comes from. It is then enforced upon us by the NCUA through our examination process. And then any of the data that we collect through our BSA program can then be used by law enforcement for analysis and prosecution when necessary. The next few slides come from the BSA exam manual and various FinCEN advisories. This 2014 A007 stated there was a poor culture of compliance existing in part due to a lack of leadership around Bank Secrecy Act items. And luckily, they defined what exactly a culture of compliance is for us. Just to touch on a few, compliance not compromised by revenue interest. That may seem very self-evident, but we just have to make sure that no matter what it is, compliance should never be compromised by revenue in any situation. Leadership providing adequate resources, both human and technological, to be able to fulfill your BSA duties. Programs should be tested by an independent third party, which would be your audit, which we'll discuss when we get to our pillars of compliance. And then a basic understanding of how BSA reports are used and how they can help out with both statewide, local, and national efforts. The BSA exam manual also states that the board and senior management should be informed of changes and new developments in BSA. Luckily for us, BSA changes are very few and far between, so that makes that element very easy for us to satisfy, as well as what can happen when we are non-compliant and what risks do we open up the credit union to. Section 748.2 reviews our policymaking requirements. The purpose is that we ensure all credit unions establish and maintain procedures designed to assure and monitor BSA compliance. And you see in red here your absolute minimum, which states that the compliance program must be written down, which would be your policy, which I'm sure you have. That policy then needs to be approved by the credit union's board and then reflected in the credit union's minutes. Even on months when you don't have any BSA activity, it can be extremely helpful just to add one line item that states such. In section 2, our member identification program, which we will get into as we continue throughout the presentation. Our next section are our pillars of BSA compliance. If you have these 5 things incorporated into your BSA program, then you have set your credit union up with the proper tools for success. And our first pillar of internal controls, we see on this slide that the board of directors, acting through your senior management team, are the party who is ultimately responsible for ensuring the credit union maintains an effective BSA structure. And the level of internal controls that can be put in place for your credit union should always go along with your credit union's characteristics, such as the size of the credit union. How complex is your credit union? What does your field of membership look like? What unique risks do you have that other credit unions may or may not have? Some examples of some common internal controls around BSA include providing for dual control when possible. There are also sufficient controls and monitoring systems that can also assist in detecting when activity may be suspicious. Anytime you have new employees or new board members, it's always a good idea to incorporate BSA compliance into those job descriptions or provide some initial training. And always reach out to the league if we can help out with this. And also around Policy Pro. Policy Pro is one of my favorite values of LSCU affiliation. That if you are in need of updating your BSA policy or any other policy for that matter, ensure you check out lscu.coop under our compliance section, where you will find a library of sample policies that can further be customized to your credit union. Pillar number 2 is training, which at a minimum, credit union employees whose job duties involve BSA all need to ensure we have an annual BSA training program. The most important piece of this program is that you have documentation of completion. So if you are listening to this recording today and you are needing those certificates, please feel free to shoot your member engagement consultant an email and we'll be happy to provide those for you. And also, any new employees should also be given training during orientation, and your BSA officer should have another deeper level of training to review any changes or additional regulatory requirements. Pillar number 3 is an audit, which is recommended of your BSA program once every 12 to 18 months. And this independent testing should include some of the bullet points that you see on the slide here. They'll include ensuring you have a policy that's up to date, that then matches an up-to-date procedure. They'll review your credit union's risk assessment, which we'll take a look at on the following slides. If you've had any BSA violations or deficiencies, ensuring those have been fixed in a timely manner. They'll also ensure that your staff has completed training and the sufficiency of your suspicious activity monitoring systems. If you are in need of a BSA audit, the Credit Union Audit and Compliance Group is always happy to help with that. And please reach out to a member of that team or your member engagement consultant for more information. Pillar number 4 is a BSA officer. So while everyone at every credit union whose job duties touch BSA has this training on an annual basis, there is also one individual that gets to add another job title to their name as BSA officer. And it's important that this person has the sufficient authority and resources to administer an effective BSA program based on your credit union's risk profile. The BSA officer is also responsible for ensuring that a regular, as in monthly, update to the board of directors of any BSA issues or reports that have been filed or anything that has to do with BSA is completed on a regular monthly basis. Next, we get into our risk assessment. which is simply a two-step process where we're identifying our different categories of risks and understanding what we can do to help mitigate those risks. Step one involves identifying risk categories that you see on the screen here. These can be broken down into products and services, members, and in red, you see MSBs. So MSBs are money service businesses, and they can pose a huge risk to credit unions. So ensure that you know what your accounts are truly being used for. And FinCEN also breaks it down into geography in two different areas. We have high intensity drug trafficking areas and also high intensity financial crime areas. And once we've identified what our risk categories are, we can then move down into step two and use the data available through our credit union's core processor and other business systems to analyze some of these categories. And some helpful questions you can see on the screen here, but really digging into what is the purpose of this account? What type of activity do we anticipate the member to be running through this account? As credit unions, we have a lot of safeguards around member location and also depending on your field of membership, also sometimes occupation, but really understanding that every member has a different level of risk based on their attributes as well, just like our products, services, and geography. So once we've decided these, it's always important to use the available technology to help mitigate this risk. And here you see an example of a simple risk matrix moving from low to high, left to right. We see that if we are working with a stable, known base, this is a much lower risk than if we were opening up our field of membership into a brand new state or a brand new county or whatever it may be. And same thing on the next line here. The more that we move into and online services, the higher risk that you pick up as well. And just like with anything in business or in life, you can place anything on a risk matrix. It doesn't say that it's bad to be low or high. It's just simply understanding where you fall and knowing what tools you have the ability to put in place to mitigate this risk. Once we've developed our risk assessment, we can then use that information to customize our BSA program. Anytime that we are introducing a new product, service, expansion, or any field of membership change, it's always a great idea to review your risk assessment. And if not, simply once every 12 to 18 months along the same timeline as your audit. This is a listing of some of the high intensity drug trafficking areas in the LSCU footprint. If your credit union has a branch in any of these HIDTA counties, that should be addressed in your risk assessment. And here we have the high intensity financial crime areas. For this classification, it is only South Florida that falls into here. Next, we have our member identification program. The purpose of this program is to be able to form a reasonable belief that we know the identity of each member. We do this through a two-step process. The first piece is collecting the 4 items of identifying info, which include name, date of birth, an address, a physical address, and a social. So name, birthday, address, social security number, in all cases without exception. And it's not good enough for them to call us and we write it down or they submit it online. We also must always move into step 2 and collect our verifying info. 99% of the time, you'll use the top option, the documentary method. And that is simply a government issued ID that has a photo on it that is not yet expired. So a driver's license, an ID card, a passport, a military ID, all of those items would fit the documentary method to collect name, birthday, address, and social, as long as they are unexpired and contain a photo. The other 1% of the time, you can also use the non-documentary method, which includes information obtained from a credit bureau, tax return information, but always remember, we have to include these 4 pieces of information. And if for some reason they don't have the documentary, definitely be wary of that. There are ways around it with the non-documentary method, but the non-documentary method is actually a better way to confirm some of the documentary information. Once we've collected these items, these identifying info must be kept for 5 years after the account is closed, and a full description of the documents used must be included here. We also must include the cross-reference with the federal terrorist list, which we'll talk about as we continue moving through the presentation. And we must also provide notice to the applicant that the credit union will be requesting information to identify their identification. Next, we have our 2 reports, starting off with our currency transaction reports, or CTR. And if you read it backwards, it defines it for you. So a report of a transaction that was done in currency, in this case, cash. So CTRs apply to cash only. And we are required to file a CTR for each transaction in currency of more than $10,000. There's multiple ways in which we can reach this over $10,000 threshold, including multiple transactions in any one business day or on behalf of the same person. If they went to one of your branches and then went to a different branch within the same day, that also counts towards the totals. Shared branching transactions also count towards these thresholds as well. For currency transaction reports, we must file these reports within 15 calendar days after the date of transaction. They are filed online and a 5-year record retention. Again, currency is coin and paper money. Checks do not count towards our CTR thresholds. And again, it is anytime there is money coming over to the credit union in cash, they can use it as a deposit, or they could try to be sneaky and put it towards a loan payment, or even try to open it up with a CD. We always make sure that we consolidate cash in and cash out separately without adding them together or offsetting them. Then for our second report, we have our suspicious activity reports, or abbreviated as a SAR. We have to file these anytime we have a criminal violation with these 3 specific thresholds here, including insider abuse of any amount, aggregating $5,000 or more for an identifiable suspect, and aggregating $25,000 or more for an unknown suspect. But we also have the rest of these clarifications down here where the majority of SAR reporting comes from. So it may involve potential money laundering or other illegal activity. We reviewed the definition of money laundering at the beginning. Number 2, designed to evade the BSA. So let's skip back for just one moment. Currency transaction reports are required for more than $10,000. So if we have $10,000 even, we don't have to file a CTR. If we have $10,000 and 1 penny, now we would be required to file a CTR. However, if we had transactions that came in at $9,999, that is pretty suspicious that they are that close to their CTR threshold. So in that instance, they may be structuring that transaction specifically to evade the BSA laws, which would actually result in a SAR. And our last one in bold has no business or apparent lawful purpose, not the type of transaction the member would be expected to engage in, and the credit union knows of no reasonable explanation for the transaction. So this case goes back to knowing your members and knowing what is and what is out of the ordinary for them. It can be pretty difficult to tell if a transaction is the type that the member would be expected to engage in if we don't know normal patterns for our members. So knowing your members is important on many levels outside of just the member experience piece. SARs are also filed electronically, but we do have a little bit longer to file them. We have no later than 30 days from the detection of facts to file a SAR. And detection of facts does not mean the very moment the transaction occurs. That may be in 20 minutes. It may be at the end of the day. It may be at the end of the week that we have that light bulb go off in our head that something may not be right with that transaction. At that point in time is when our 30-day timeline to file our SAR begins. If we're working on identifying a suspect, that filing can be extended out to 60 days. And FinCEN also asks that you re-report on continuing suspicious activity at least every 90 days. There is a 5-year record retention that we keep all of our SARs for, and the board should be kept aware of SAR filings as a summary. And SARs are incredibly confidential. Disclosing the existence or non-existence of a SAR is prohibited, especially to a member. So we never talk about filing a SAR. We never even discuss names or dollar amounts or dates or suspicions around what we think would happen. The only people who know that you filed a SAR are your BSA officer and your board. And the extent of the information that they discuss is that we had a SAR this month. That is it. The only time we would have something we would not file a SAR for, as you see, would be for robbery, because it is a different sort of investigation outside of FinCEN. So some red flags for suspicious activity. I always like to preface this by saying that you in credit unions, your employees, your people, your frontline, know your members and their patterns better than anyone else. So really rely on them to be able to identify these red flags. But some general red flags include if a member is trying to use an ID that you've never seen before, it doesn't look quite right, maybe the stock or the thickness or the clarity of the photo just doesn't seem right, that's definitely a red flag. If you have a member who's trying to persuade an employee not to file a report, asking numerous questions about how much money they can give to the credit union before the report, be very wary of these situations and be aware for possible red flags. You have additional fund transfers coming in large round dollar, $100 or $1,000 amounts. That can be a sign of layering and micro layering. And any of those transfers occurring from high risk geographic locations without an apparent business reason, or many small incoming transfers received and almost immediately going right back out. Monetary instruments. Credit unions are also required to maintain a record for each traveler's check, cashier's check, or money order sold for more than $3,000 to $10,000 in cash inclusive. Our record should always include the name, date, serial number, type of instrument, amount, and identifying information. If your credit union allows for the sale of these items to non-members, even more additional information is required. And same thing with our CTRs and adding those amounts together, multiple purchases during one business day totaling $3,000 or more on monetary instruments are also treated as one purchase. And we have a 5-year record retention on monetary instruments. The beneficial owners rule was enacted back in 2018. Credit unions are required to have written procedures designed to identify and verify legal entity members. Legal entity members are defined as corporations, LLCs, or other entities created by filing a public document with the Secretary of State, but does not include financial institutions, federal or state governments, publicly traded companies, non-US government entities that don't engage in commercial activities. And the procedures will contain the same elements of your member identification program. So what we need to do on this piece is that anytime we have a beneficial owner, which is defined for you down here, so anyone who owns 25% or more equity interest in a legal entity, those in a position of power or control a legal entity, such as CEO, CFO, president, or treasurer of a business, and also those trusts that own 25% of an entity. We will also have to collect their identification, including the 4 pieces of information from our member identification program, including name, birthday, address, and social for anyone opening these accounts. Even if your credit union does not serve business accounts, that is recommended to continue to develop a policy. There is a sample located in Policy Pro for your convenience. And if we can assist in anything around this policy, please don't hesitate to let us know. So while the information that we collect as part of our Bank Secrecy Act program is supposed to be kept quiet, and we don't discuss any of our suspicions as to what be going on with any of the transactions, Section 314A of the US Patriot Act, which was enacted after 9/11, allows for a level of information sharing. So if law enforcement is working on a money laundering case at another financial institution in your area, they have the ability to send out a 314A request, and you pretty much do everything you see in step 3. So you're reviewing to see if you also have an account for that member at your credit union, if you have had one within the past 12 months, and any history of transactions for the past 6 months. You would then have 14 days to report these matches back to FinCEN, and always make sure if you receive one of these requests that you document the receipt, review, and response. These requests can be pretty rare. As you see in green, they only send them out when they are very solid on an existing case, as 95% of 314A requests have contributed to arrests or indictments. There's also the voluntary information sharing portion, which comes from 314B of the US Patriot Act. But the requirements of it are a little bit more stringent than 314A. Maybe one day we'll be able to use this in an expanded capacity. Next, we have OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Asset Control. Different department than FinCEN. FinCEN is concerned about an individual or group of individuals who are money laundering for their own financial gain. And OFAC is a little bit different. They're the ones who are enforcing sanctions on people, nations, and entities. The piece that we have to pick up in this is that credit unions must regularly review the specially designated national list against their membership. And we're also required to block or reject people or entities on the list and report those transactions to OFAC within 10 business days. We also send an annual list by September 30th, as of June 30th, of these transactions. And we are also required to perform a risk assessment around international fund transfers, non-resident alien accounts, foreign member accounts, anything of that nature. We do like to review OFAC because the compliance pillars are essentially the same as for BSA, ensuring that we're always collecting the pieces of information from our members, being aware of red flags, and ensuring that we meet our reporting requirements. So just like activities and products can fall between low risk and high risk for our credit union, we also have to ensure that we realize that our members could also be categorized as low risk, high risk, or somewhere in between. So it's recommended that you develop policies for investigations, responsibilities, and chain of command. And member due diligence is an ongoing process that goes along with your credit union's risk portfolio. So we collect info on everyone. For low risk members, which would be the majority most likely, we just want to make sure we have regularly updated contact info for many reasons of importance outside of just BSA. And if you do have high risk members, ensure that you are able to dedicate the time to review those accounts. Make sure that you're asking some of the questions you see on the bottom of the screen here if you have any questions. What is the source of these funds? Does that match with the occupation that we can find online or through social media? Does it match what we're finding on where the business is organized and other employment documents? And if we have any questions or concerns about this, ensure that we thoroughly document the decision and analysis. And what did we learn from recent FinCEN enforcement actions? Around our same pillars, for internal controls, avoid wiring money abroad and servicing money service businesses unless we can create the business case that states that the risk is less than the reward. But do ensure that we update our controls annually, especially if we're introducing any new products, services, expanding our field of membership, or really making any changes whatsoever to the credit union. For your BSA officer, continue to hire sufficient and competent staff. We also have our further in-depth BSA training workshop for BSA officers. For training, ensure that we continue to complete this training on an annual basis for your board and relevant employees. And also ensure that if you're in your BSA audit, if they come back with any recommendations, ensure that you give them some thought and consideration from that independent audit. And with that, you have completed your 2021 Bank Secrecy Act and Anti-Money Laundering training. If you have any questions on today's information or any further assistance that the League of Southeastern Credit Unions can provide, please don't hesitate to contact myself, the Compliance Department, or your member engagement consultant. Thanks so much. Take care.